Hello, John Vandervelden here for my fifth virtual authors event. And I took it outside again. It's a beautiful day. I hope it's nice weather where you are. And I thought today I would talk about a question that has come up time and again on my personal authors meetings with readers. And that one question that comes up time and again was, why did I choose to use the character I did for the central character? And the more important one is, was it difficult to write the stories from a woman's perspective? And this has to do with something called point of view. So I thought perhaps I would begin explaining a little bit about point of view. Point of view is one of the tools writers have. And it comes, and it's used in very different ways. We have first person point of view, where the person telling the story is actually the character. We have, in that case, the stories will go, well, I answered the door. I was cold. When I walked in the rain, I got wet. You see, I is first person. There was second person point of view, where the story tries to put the reader as the main character. And you have those stories that you heard a strange noise in the closet. You were speaking to your son. Those, I would think, would be the most difficult types of point of view to use. I haven't used it. I've used first person, but I haven't used second. And I don't see it very often. Then we have third person point of view, where a narrator is looking down on the story and telling the story as it's happening from a different place than the story itself. Now, third person is what my books, Misty Creek and Elizabeth's Journey, are. And I like to use third person. It's just a storytelling that I use. But I use what's called third person limited. You have third person omnipotent, which is kind of like as if God was looking down on the scene. He knows what's behind the rock. The narrator knows what's behind a rock. He knows what the character will face, whether he tells you that or not. He tells you what's happening in other areas that is outside of the character's location, for instance. I use third person limited. Third person limited tells a story through the character. And it's only the character, or sometimes it's maybe two or three different characters, that share the story with the reader. And the reader doesn't learn events or happenings or anything before the characters whose point of view I'm using does. So in my books, these two, the point of view is Elizabeth Beck. And so we see the story through her eyes. And we don't find out what happens in other areas until Elizabeth does. Sometimes this makes the story better because we can build a tension as Elizabeth waits for some information to come to her. Other times it's more difficult because important things are sometimes happening outside of her sphere of reality. What's happening in another village, another place, another settlement, at home? These things don't come to the reader until it come to Elizabeth. But that's what I use. And then we come to the second question as why did I pick Elizabeth? And I spoke last time about the seed of the story. And the seed of the story for these two books starts at a very simple thing. And that is that Elizabeth was left standing at the altar while the man she loved ran off with her best friend. And her reaction to that. The story grew from that one event. Of course, as an author, I could have done anything. I could have twisted around where Jameson was left standing at the altar and Elizabeth ran off. But I thought, at the concept, I never really dwelt on it too much, but to me, there was a lot more material available. If it was Elizabeth that was abandoned, if it was Elizabeth dealing with the brokenness. And so that's where she comes in. Now, the next thing is, how can I tell a story from a woman's point of view? Which is, something I never thought of when I wrote the first draft. It never crossed my mind. I had written some short stories from a woman's point of view and had not felt it awkward. But I was asked if that was difficult, and I didn't think it was at the time because I didn't consider it. I didn't even give it a thought. The story flowed, and I continued to build on it. However, it was brought to my attention by the time I had gone through the third or fourth draft that if I'd missed this dramatically, it was going to be a disaster. And so I asked my wife, Jackie, my beloved, to read the story. And when she read it, I asked her, was I close? I don't expect to be spot on, but close. And she said, I was remarkably close. She did not find it a problem. I trust her judgment. And readers have told me the same thing. In a book club, I was so delighted to be invited to participate, to come and speak with these readers of mine on Misty Creek. And they said to me things like, I was surprised when I got to the back and you were a man. You wrote this story that you were a man. It surprised me. So that's those are the kind of statements, shall I say, that lift a writer up. That it wasn't my gender that shaped the story. It was Elizabeth's experiences. So when you are a writer and you work for a long time on a book, and I've spoken to that about the time it's taken. I had more than 4 years into working on Misty Creek. Elizabeth is no longer just some word on the page, E-L, She's a friend of mine. I've gotten to know her. And knowing her has helped shape her actions as she's moved forward. And then there's the other question I'm asked on occasion, and that is, why on earth did I end Misty Creek the way I ended it? Those of you who have read Misty Creek are probably asking have asked that several times. Some people have been angry about how the first book of Misty Creek ended. And I tell them this: if you've really read the book and you understand the position Elizabeth is at that point of the story, if you understand the type of person she became by that time of the story, then would you be surprised by her action as it happened? I mean, I could have offered a very dramatic change of her travels to end the story right there and then. But it wouldn't have felt to me at that point true to Elizabeth. And knowing Matthew, as you have learned to know him, seeing his integrity and the type of man he is, surely you could see no other response at that moment either. And so the book terminates and leaves the reader uncomfortable. But it really follows the logical conclusion of the actions to that point. Anyway, we've used up our time and more. I'm hoping that you're still well and that you're finding a way to come to a situation where you can deal with things the way you'd like to deal with them, or at least a little better. And that we'll get through this COVID. So have a good day and blessings.